The National Electrical Code, or NEC, specifies minimum clearance requirements for overhead lines to ensure safety and prevent electrical hazards. It is essential to differentiate between the clearance requirements for the neutral conductor and the primary conductors, often referred to as hot lines. NEC Section 225.18 addresses the clearance from the neutral to ground. For lines not over 300 volts to ground, the minimum required clearance is 8 feet. For lines exceeding 300 volts to ground, the minimum clearance increases to 9 feet. This distinction based on voltage level is crucial for compliance and safety. NEC Section 225.19 covers the clearance from primary conductors, or hot lines, to ground. For lines not over 300 volts to ground, a minimum clearance of 10 feet is required. When the voltage exceeds 300 volts to ground, the minimum clearance must be 12 feet. Note that these are general guidelines, and local regulations or utility-specific requirements might impose stricter clearances. Consider a scenario involving a primary distribution line operating at a voltage exceeding 300 volts to ground. According to NEC Section 225.18, the running neutral on this pole must have a minimum clearance of 9 feet from the ground. It is important to avoid confusing this neutral clearance with the clearance for the hot lines, which is governed by NEC Section 225.19. The clearance for the hot lines in this case would be 12 feet, as they also exceed 300 volts to ground. Confusing these clearance requirements can lead to non-compliance and potentially hazardous situations. Therefore, always refer to the specific NEC sections and consider the voltage levels involved. In summary, remember that the NEC differentiates between neutral and hot line clearances. Neutral clearances are addressed in Section 225.18, while hot line clearances are covered in Section 225.19. Voltage levels play a crucial role in determining the required clearances, with higher voltages necessitating greater distances from the ground. Consulting the latest edition of the NEC and any applicable local regulations is paramount to ensure safe and compliant electrical installations. Ignoring these clearance requirements can have severe consequences, including electrical accidents and power outages. Always prioritize safety and adhere to the NEC guidelines when working with overhead power lines. Firstly, it's important to understand the difference between the neutral conductor and the primary conductors. The neutral conductor typically carries the return current in a three-phase or single-phase system. The primary conductors, or hot lines, carry the main voltage from the source to the load. Secondly, the voltage to ground is a key factor in determining the required clearance. If the voltage to ground is not over 300 volts, the clearance requirements are lower than if the voltage exceeds 300 volts. Thirdly, the NEC provides specific tables and guidelines for determining the minimum clearance requirements. These tables take into account the voltage, the type of conductor, and the location of the line. Fourthly, it's important to consult with the local utility company or electrical inspector to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. Local jurisdictions may have additional requirements that go beyond the NEC. Fifthly, always use appropriate safety equipment and procedures when working near overhead power lines. This includes wearing appropriate personal protective equipment, such as insulated gloves and sleeves, and maintaining a safe distance from energized conductors. Sixthly, consider the potential for conductor sag. Over time, overhead conductors can sag due to temperature changes, ice loading, or wind. This sag can reduce the clearance between the conductor and the ground or other objects. Seventhly, the NEC also addresses the clearance requirements for overhead conductors over roadways, walkways, and other areas accessible to pedestrians or vehicles. These clearances are typically higher than the clearances for conductors in open areas. Eighthly, be aware of the potential for tree growth near overhead power lines. Trees can grow into the lines and cause electrical outages or even fires. It's important to maintain adequate clearance between trees and overhead conductors. Ninthly, regularly inspect overhead power lines for signs of damage or deterioration. This includes checking for broken conductors, damaged insulators, and corroded hardware. Tenthly, If you are not qualified to work on or near overhead power lines, contact a qualified electrical contractor or utility company to perform the work. Working with electricity can be dangerous, and it's important to have the proper training and experience. The NEC specifies that for lines not over 300 volts to ground, the minimum clearance from neutral to ground is 8 feet. For lines over 300 volts to ground, the minimum clearance from neutral to ground is 9 feet. For lines not over 300 volts to ground, the minimum clearance from primary conductors to ground is 10 feet. For lines over 300 volts to ground, the minimum clearance from primary conductors to ground is 12 feet. It is important to note that these are minimum clearances, and local regulations may require greater clearances. Always consult the local utility company or electrical inspector to determine the specific clearance requirements in your area. When working near overhead power lines, it is important to maintain a safe distance from energized conductors. The minimum safe distance depends on the voltage of the line. For lines up to 50,000 volts, the minimum safe distance is 10 feet. For lines over 50,000 volts, the minimum safe distance increases. Always use appropriate safety equipment and procedures when working near overhead power lines. This includes wearing appropriate personal protective equipment such as insulated gloves and sleeves, and maintaining a safe distance from energized conductors. If you are not qualified to work on or near overhead power lines, contact a qualified electrical contractor or utility company to perform the work. Working with electricity can be dangerous, and it's important to have the proper training and experience. Proper understanding and application of the NEC is critical for ensuring safety and preventing accidents when working with overhead power lines. Always refer to the latest edition of the NEC and consult with qualified professionals to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations.